Thank you, everyone, and thank you especially for the fantastic Garage Museum team for a kind invitation and your lovely hospitality as well. Before I begin, I think she probably said that I'm on the faculty of Sotheby's Institute of Art in London, and just so it makes some sense, yes, though we are of course connected to Sotheby's Auction House and have a wonderful relationship with Sotheby's Auction House, we are a separate entity and we're an educational institution. So the reason I've been asked to do this is because the idea of having a very independent and more academic look at auctions. So it's not about the individual auction houses, we're looking at the whole auction industry in a very kind of independent way. So that's enough to be said. Before we begin, how many people here have actually been to an auction? Hands up if you've been to an auction. You might have just bought something, by the way, by putting your hand up, but I'm not going to say that. I think you have. Mark, I presume you have been one or two. That's very good. And I think what's very interesting is that a lot of people have, and even if you haven't, you've seen auctions and you see people putting the paddles and the gavel goes down and it's sold. It looks so simple and so easy and so carefree, and there's so much more that you don't know about. And I think that's what I'm trying to do today, is to tell you, to dig a little deeper and to tell you exactly it's not as simple. There's a lot of issues, a lot of players, a lot of things that go on behind the scenes that really affect what's going on in the auction world, but also how the auction world is very much affecting artists, sort of careers and the whole of the art market. So auctions are a very, very, core part of the art market. So, I suppose if this, just to get this out of the way. Have you seen this? Yes. I just wanted to show it now so we can just have it on and everyone can talk about it and go, ooh, $450 million for a Da Vinci painting. Just quickly, we're going to return to this, but I think what's very interesting to see, how did this happen? This is almost more than doubled the previous auction record for a piece of art that sold at auction in one huge swoop. And it wasn't necessarily expected, it just happened. How did that happen? And that's something we will talk about later, but I thought we'd just get it out there, everyone see it, and then we'll return to it again as well. So what I'm going to be doing this evening is quite a lot of things. Looking at auctions generally, what are auctions and what's the point of auctions? Also looking at the auctions in relation to the art market. I don't know how many of you know very much about the art market generally, but it's a good idea to sort of put it in some context, not just the auction world, but how the whole art market operates and where auctions sit within it. And looking at buying and selling an auction, what each party gets from that. Why are they doing that? What are the benefits? What are the risks? What are the strategies? And then also going really sort of very, very hands-on into looking at an auction house catalog, looking at all the different sections of the catalog and how the auction houses actually work to demonstrate the value of a certain piece of art. What things are looked at, what are you as a collectors as well should be looking at in terms of when you're buying and selling art. And as well the future. Where is the auction world going? Looking at the online world and how that's affecting things as well. And then also some questions. So please save your questions for the end, and more than happy to delve into it a bit further as well. So to begin with, what is an auction? I'm not going to ask you to define it. I'm just going to throw it up. It's not a very complicated thing. A good working definition of an auction is a process of buying and selling goods or services by offering them up for sale, taking bids, and selling them to the highest bidder. It's what's known as sort of, I think, an English auction in general as well. That's a classic sort of form of auction and the way the auction in the art world operate. There are other kinds of auctions that do exist. There's something called a Dutch auction. Don't know if anyone's heard of that, which is almost the opposite of the English auction. So the Dutch auction starts at a very high level, and then the auctioneer goes down by increments. So the first person who puts their hand up gets it. So it's a really cruel, really mean way of selling something. So you're just hoping that no one will put their hand up before you get to the price that you can pay for it. There's also something called a sealed bid auction. So that's often used in the construction industry still. So basically what it is what it says. You put your bid into an envelope, whatever the highest amount you think is going to be. You have to think, obviously, what you think is going to win for you. And then you put into sealed bid. People open the sealed bids, and whoever has the highest number wins it. it all worked on the same sort of psychology as well. You're always thinking about how you're competing with someone else for the particular object and how your behavior is going to somehow win the day as well. Just quickly to look at the sort of landscape, the European sort of auction system, Boloten was very first, which is based in Austria, Sotheby's, Christie's, all around the same time in the 1700s, been around for a long time. So the idea basically that auctions have been around and the auction houses have been around for a very, very long time and been growing and established as well. That being said, these are not the only auction houses that exist. These are the major auction houses. There's hundreds of regional auction houses everywhere, and which is something I will talk about as well. The whole auction industry works on these same principles, not just the top tier. Also worth mentioning is the Chinese auction houses, which are gaining more and more in breadth and in sort of in power. Beijing Poly, which is a state-owned one, and China Guardian as well. So that's the landscape. Now let's look at the art market. What does exist in? This is the art market, which is both the dealer sales and as well the auction sales. The size of the whole art market in terms of sales. I won't make you guess. I'll put you out of your mystery. It's about in 2016. These results are published every year in March, so we'll find out from what's 2017. But 2016, $56.6 billion is the art market, which seems amazing, and it is a big number. But I always, sort of give some comparisons as well. It's not quite as big as Google revenue for 2014 was even higher than that. And the oil and gas industry is slightly larger than the art market. So it just puts you in perspective. It's a big number, and it's a growing industry and a growing market. But in comparison, it's really quite a small market in sort of global terms. This is a trajectory of the art market, which has dealer and auction sales. You can see there was a dip after 2008, been going up and down. And for the last year or two, it's been sort of down. There's been a couple of dips, but there'll be good news at the end of the lecture. I'll tell you what's happening in 2007, because the results have just been published in terms of the auction sales, and it's good. There's been the dip has, I'm not going to go too far into it, why there was a dip. There was an issue on the auction side about supply, about sort of people selling their work or not selling their work. And there was lots of economics issues as well, but things are looking better. So back to looking at the statistics, the top 3 art markets by market share in terms of the regions. Anyone know what the top one is? I shouldn't be asking you this. What is it always in some way? It's the USA, yes, it's 40%. Although I must say, in 2011, it was China. So these numbers change quite a lot too, and there's a lot of factors that go into what the biggest markets are. UK is 21%, China is 21%. Everyone gets very disappointed that their country is not up there. You think, where is Russia? Where is everyone else? And there's a reason for that. It's not that number. This is a more of a visual pie chart in terms of regionally where the market is organized. If the USA is 40%, if you look at the USA market, this is not American art that's being sold to Americans necessarily. It could be that there could be Russian art being sold to a Chinese buyer, but it's being sold in New York. It becomes a sale that sort of originates in New York. So that's where the market, it's where the transaction happens. It's nothing to do with the art itself or the buyer or the seller of the art. So in these jurisdictions is where the infrastructure is. It's where the auction houses are centered. This is where the gallery systems are centered, which is why they're the ones that are the center regionally of the art market. Right, so last piece of the puzzle. In that $56.6 billion, dealer sales, how is that split between dealer sales, dealers and galleries, and auction sales? About half and half, you think? It's actually 57% at the moment dealer sales and 43% of auction sales. This throws up a lot of issues as well. We know the auction sale number because auction results are a matter of public record, and we do know them and they have to be published. How do we know dealer sales? How do we know that that's the proportion of dealer sales that exist? The answer is we don't. So that's a number that's kind of fabricated, but in an intelligent way. The only way, and this all stems back to one key principle about the art market, is it's an unregulated market. It's not a market that there's no rules, no one has to report your figures, dealers don't have to tell anyone what they buy or sell. So in terms of what the dealers and galleries are doing, it's a bit of a mystery. The only way that this number can be found out is by going and asking them. So this company, which you see on the bottom, called Arts Economics, every year goes out to a great deal of international galleries and dealers, asking them what their results are, how they sold, what they sold. They could not tell the truth, it's possible, but for the most part, it's the best we have in terms of a window into the gallery and dealer world. Some of the big issues, so primary and secondary markets, we often distinguish in terms of the art world. Primary markets is what it sounds like. It's the first time that an artwork is sold. So that's sort of gallery sales, people representing living artists. Secondary markets are when the work is sold again. So that's often we talk about the auction houses being secondary markets primarily, but there are also dealers who obviously are also reselling work as well. So that's the sort of distinction. There's the issue of transparency in the art market, and that's what I'm saying. We often don't see what at least more than half of the art market does, because the auction results we know, dealer and gallery sales we don't know. And it's a bit of a mystery, and because it's not regulated, no one has to tell anybody. So it makes it a lot of fun to try to figure out what's going on as well. As I said, 2011, that number was 50-50. So the dealer sales seem to be sort of creeping up in terms of the proportion of the sales internationally. So let's get back to auctions and say, okay, so we know that sort of how much is sold at auctions, how much is sold in galleries and dealers. Why go to auction? Sorry, people in front row, but I think it's interesting intellectually to understand what the benefits of actually going to auction. Why do people choose to go to auction rather than buying or selling their work through a gallery system? And these are some of the benefits. I want to go through each of the parties in some way and saying what's in it for them. So one of the key benefits, obviously, at auction is competition. You're not just selling it to one person. There are a number of people, hopefully, who want that piece or who are bidding for that piece. So that's going to hopefully drive the price up to a price that's different and higher than you would get if you were just selling it individually. That's really the essence of what an auction and hopefully the end of an auction is. Access, it's very democratic auctions. Anyone's welcome. You can come in and buy it and do not buy it or do whatever you want. The gallery system is not necessarily as open as the auction house system. You often have to have relationships with galleries to operate differently, but the auction world is a very open and democratic one. It's a global market. The auction houses have access to global dealers. You have global recognition and knowledge. So you're actually in touch with more potential buyers and sellers than if you were doing it individually. And time is a really interesting thing because that's the thing that pushes people to buy things quicker. If you had 3 weeks to decide whether you want to buy a piece of art, you might just forget about it after a week or just not really be interested. If you've got this split second where someone else is bidding against you and you want it, that element is a very important psychological part of the auction. Also, just recently heard a very interesting thing psychologically as well in terms of why people get caught up in auctions. Once you start bidding, you really want to keep going. And a lot of that is because once you bid something, for that instant, you own it, right? For that little print, until someone else bids against you, you own it. So you feel like, I own this. And then it goes away. And then someone else bids. And there's a terrible feeling of loss, I think, in that instant. And you want it back. So that's part of the psychology, I think, that sort of keeps you going. The fact that once you're in it, you somehow, there's a sort of inkling of the fact that you have some stake in it and you want to continue and get it. We're not going to talk too much about psychology, but we'll go. So what does each party gain? So I want to look at each of the buyer, seller, and the auction house and see what it is, from the auction process that they're getting or they're gaining, which they wouldn't necessarily gain if they wasn't buying and selling at auction. So starting off with the seller, I think it's very interesting in a way. Why would a seller choose to go to auction rather than selling it sort of privately? What are the benefits that they get by going to auction? One of the things is a global audience. For the global auction houses, the auction houses are everywhere and they have contacts everywhere and globally. And so you'll have more people that you're reaching with your potential artwork in terms of selling it. Global marketing. The auction houses will publicize it internationally. If you're a gallery in one city, you won't actually get the same reach of selling your article, of your artwork, as if you go into an auction house as well. Access to global intelligence, the same sort of theme. Auction houses are very aware of where the collectors for every type of work or artist is, what their sort of price ranges are, and so they're able to pinpoint and sort of direct the sale a lot more effectively and efficiently, in a way. I'm not doing a selling job for auctions, this is just a general thing. You also get the auction house sort of branding and validation as a seller, in terms of the value of the work, not necessarily for your personality, but also the fact that your work is somehow seen in a different light in a way because it's been handled by an auction house who have actually taken it on board and are sort of adopting it. So there is some sort of branding effect as well. And competitive prices. The thing about an auction, and the Da Vinci was no different. The night before the Da Vinci sale, I think Christie's was really scared that it wasn't going to sell at all. And there were lots of things floating around. You never know what's going to happen at auction. And hopefully it goes in your favor and things sort of have that energy and take off. And you'll get something that you wouldn't get if it was just a regular sales situation. So that's the sellers. From the buyer's perspective, why would a buyer go to an auction house to buy something? What are the benefits of them going to an auction rather than buying it privately or buying it some other way? One is definitely, we say, the due diligence expertise, which is a word meaning the auction house spends a lot of time scrutinizing every artwork that they sell. It's because in their own interest as well. They have to be sure that what they're selling is authentic, it's got the right provenance, it's legal, and it's in a decent condition to be sold. So they do a huge amount of work in terms of every particular artwork. So as a buyer, it gives you some sense of comfort that someone has done a lot of that sort of filtering work ahead of time for you, and there's a feeling of feeling more secure about it as well. There's a sort of branding reflection as well, engaging in the auction house sales as well. The sort of status of it somehow is a great thing. Public exposure, I put as a question mark. If you want public exposure, that auction is a fantastic thing for you because you will get it. If you want to be seen to be spending $100 million on a Basquiat and be in the papers the next day, you will be seen the next day in the things. So it's a public event, and it is actually very attractive to the press. So in terms of publicity, if you would like that happens. If you don't, you can also remain anonymous, and that's another sort of benefit for the buyer as well. Access, and I put access as a very interesting part thing. Well, I talked about the democraticness of the auction house. Anyone could come and play. But also, it's the fact that there's a lot of times that if you are a collector or a new collector, you actually cannot get hold of a piece of art that you might want. The gallery system is a very stringent one. Galleries are there, just to give you a bit of background, galleries are there to protect their artists' work, their markets, to sell their artists, to build their artists' long-term reputation. So it always sounds a bit mean that they might refuse to sell their artists' work to not everyone who walks in the door. They have a certain pecking order of who they would like to sell the work to. If the gallery doesn't know you, or if you're not an established collector, they might not be if there's a limited supply of a very hot artist's work, it's unlikely you'll be able to get that unless you have that relationship. And that's not being mean, it's not being snobby, it's more to do with the fact that the gallerist is very protective, and they want to make sure that the people who acquire the work are people who are going to keep the work, number one, but also that their reputation of the artist is being enhanced by who actually acquires the work. So whether it's an established collector who's respected or a museum that's respected, these are things that are going to assist the market for the artist. So the whole idea of the auction now happening throws that all up into the air. So if you go into Gagosian and say, I would like this very, very popular artist, and then Gagosian says, sorry, get to the bottom of the list. We have a very big list of waiting list before you. You can have it. If you go to auction, and if it comes up, you are just in the same boat as everyone else. So you can actually, the auctions are a means of sort of getting around that gallery system, of providing access to something that you wouldn't normally have because of the way that the gallery system works. Does that make sense? So that's why, and we'll talk about this a little later, often what happens is the prices that are paid at auctions are higher than what the prices would be in a gallery system because there's so much demand, because there are so many people who want it who maybe can't have it. So that it creates a sort of different dynamic, but we'll talk about, and that has an effect on the artist as well. So what does the auction house get? Just the love of selling art, I think. I think more. They get premiums. They get premiums from both directions, which is a fantastic business model. So they get a buyer's premium, the buyer has to pay a premium, and the seller has to pay a premium.
It's the same buyer's
No, you do tell them. It's not the same. First of all, they're different in two ways. One is the buyer's premium is established and it's set, and you cannot contract out of it. They have to charge that buyer's premium. The seller's premium is more negotiable. So it tends to be lower than the buyer's premium, and also it can be negotiated with the seller. And we'll talk about that why that happens as well.
confidential.
Everything is confidential. The art world is one big confidential, right? Unless you don't want it to be, that's the thing. What else is in it for the auction house? I think, I say prices equals onward consignments. When an auction house achieves a very good price, it's a good thing because they get commission on that price, but also it sends a message to the market, to other collectors, to other people who own work, that this is the place to bring your work if you want to sell it. So the idea of achieving record prices, of doing well for a particular artist or a particular sector, means that they will attract more people bringing their art to them, which is a very, very important thing for the auction house. So that's something else they get by engaging the artists as well in the auction. Private sales data, we'll talk about this in a second as well, but auction houses as secondary market sort of operators, not only do they operate auctions, but they also act as secondary dealers as well. So they actually sell privately as well as conducting auctions. So in the auction process, there's a lot of data and information you get about who's bidding up to what level they're bidding on, what are they bidding on, and this data is very important in terms of later on, for other purposes of private selling. So that's another reason that another benefit of the auction system for the auction houses as well is amassing. Right, so this is a very scary graph, but I'll sort of make it any lighter for you. This is basically, and I always talk about this, but going back to looking at the auction, this is the auction market, right? And the auction market is actually made up of a number of small markets, not smaller markets, and distinct markets than the whole one. So in here we have it broken down to Chinese art, Old Masters, Impressionist, Modern, and Contemporary. So it's sort of by sector. And it's kind of interesting to see how these have all operated since the year 2000, and often very differently. I think one of the key things is how far it's gone from the year 2000 up to, and we'll talk about, it's gotten better than the dip here, but it's grown hugely in not a very big space of time. There was a dip in 2008, but as you can see, it sprang back really quickly. So the resilience of the art market is really sort of very, very important. I don't want to go too much into each specific market, but for example, the Old Masters market, that green rung that goes on, it doesn't grow very much, does it, over the years? And it's not because Old Masters are bad or no one wants them. A lot of these things are much more function, in this case, about supply. There just aren't those works in the Old Masters market out there. The big masterworks are in museums, they're in private collections, and they're not making them anymore, unfortunately. You can't get Michelangelo to do another one, and then it'll happen. So there's a supply issue. So they're just not coming to the market, so the market doesn't grow as much as it does. Similarly, I think, to the Impressionist and Modern market, as much as it has grown, over the past, say, 10 years, it's been sort of staying where it is. And a lot of that is the fact that there's as well, they're not making them anymore. And the ones that are out there, there's not that many great works that are out there that sort of come to market as well. The big story, and that's why I put this slide on to some degree, is the contemporary market. It's gone in terms of the proportion of the market in 2000, which is like maybe a quarter. It's now more than a half of the auction market. So that's been a huge growth on the contemporary side, and that's really what's pushed for some reason the auction market as well, is the contemporary side of things. So why? Well, I mean, as an example, and I use Sotheby as an example, contemporary art sold by Sotheby's in 2003 to 2007, 600% increase. I mean, it's a massive boost in terms of the contemporary market. Unfortunately, something like 2008 happened, and things did slide. So contemporary art prices fell 76% after the autumn 2008. But, as I showed you on the graph in terms of resilience, the amazing art market in gloomy economic times sprang back really quickly, especially the contemporary side. So these are, this is 2013, which is not that far after, say, 2009. Jeff Koons' Balloon Dog Orange sells for the highest price for a living artist, still the record for highest price by a living artist, $58.4 million. Beautiful, magnificent piece of work, do you think? Yeah, no, it's all optional. And then Francis Bacon's Three Studies of Lucian Freud, highest price then paid for a work of art at auction, which made $142.4 million as well. Followed swiftly by this Picasso piece, which made $179.4 million. Now we know that's been eclipsed by huge amounts by this Salvador Mundi thing, that Da Vinci thing. But this is just to illustrate how quickly the recovery in terms of the contemporary market was after the dip that happened. Also, I always want to sort of put a caveat on that. You see all these sort of headlines, you see this in the news, 100 million, 200 million, 400 million. It just seems like everything is unbelievable. Everyone's making 200 million, 1,000% on there, and everything they buy and sell. That's not the case. We're looking at, that's a real snapshot of a very slim top end of the market. So the reality is, works of 1% of artists sold for over 1 million. And even more, 1.1% for over 10 million. And finally, 92.1% of work sold at auction is below 50,000 euro. So the vast majority of work is not at 200 million, it's not at 150 million, but that's what you see in the press, and that's what's sort of being evoked. And it serves a purpose in some way, but I think there's a negative aspect to that. It feels like it's too rich for me, I can't afford the art market or the art world. But the reality is, the vast majority of the art world is within a whole different ballgame than that tier that you were looking at. So, where are we now? I think in terms of, what's interesting is talk about the auction houses in terms of their relationship with the other parts of the art market. And I think one of the big sort of game changers is the auction houses used to be wholesalers. So they used to be dealers selling to other dealers. It didn't used to be they were selling to the end user, to the collector. That's only been in the past 30, 40 years, I'd say. This is new, and that's interesting, and there's been a lot of benefits to it, but there's also other effects that it's had that's kind of causing other shifts within the art market, within relationships within the art market as well. It's become somehow tricky, people sort of playing different roles as well. So in terms of the auctions and the galleries, I think the gallery's traditional role has always been, as I said, sort of representing the artist, protecting the artist's careers and things. That's the auction houses have sort of had some of that control taken away from them by the auctions. So they can, if a piece of work of their artist, of a gallery's artist, goes to auction, they have no control over what happens at auction. Right? It could not sell, which would be a very good thing, or it could sell for way over what they were selling it for originally, which is not always a good thing as well. It's a good for the artist, it's a good number, but the whole thing is it throws out of control what the gallerist normally used to have complete control of. So that's a sort of a funny situation that happens. Long-term pricing strategies, we'll look at that in a second as well, specifically. So artists, auctions and artists, pro and con, we always say. Is it great that, it's pro and con, I say, there's different scenarios that happen when an artist's work goes to auction. One, it could not sell, very bad. not good. Not good for the artist's market, not very good for the artist's career. So one tries to avoid that as much as possible in terms of an artist's reputation and their market as well. It could also, as well, build an artist's career incredibly well and incredibly swiftly, and maybe more swiftly than a gallery would be able to, because it exposes it to the entire market. So there's two sides to look at, from the artist's perspective, how auctions operate. As I said, long-term market control issues, they still does throw things out as well. Primary market auctions, interesting enough. I mean, there haven't been that many instances of an actual artist putting their market directly into auction. Damien Hirst had a very famous instance of that. Everyone heard of 2008, he had an auction called Beautiful Inside My Head Forever sale at Sotheby's, where he actually sold about $200 million worth of art in one evening. It was the same evening that Lehman Brothers Bank collapsed. So it was a very odd evening that was happening. But it was also, maybe more momentous, is the fact that it was an artist who was selling directly into auction, bypassing their dealers, selling direct primary market material into the auction house. Does that happen often? Damien Hirst had a lot of, has a big market, had a lot of power, and someone like that probably could do that. And, it doesn't happen very often that artists would directly go into auction as well. So, an example, and I just wanted to show why it becomes tricky. What happens when an auction situation takes control out of the gallery and out of the artist's pricing mechanism, and what the pros and cons and issues are. So, has anyone heard of Adrian Geni, who's a Romanian artist, very big name, very popular? This is a work in 2008 called Nickelodeon. Now, the story behind this, I'll give you all the facts and figures. Private sales, Pace Gallery was selling his work at the time, 2016, for £650,000. This piece was at auction in Christie's for, the highest was at 1.5 million. So just looking at those numbers, there's an issue here. Sort of what's going on there? So actually, I could, that same year buy that piece at the gallery for 650. That's what the price of the gallery was selling it for. This work, when it goes to the auction, had an highest bid of 1.5 million. That's because of this access issue. That's because, I'll tell you why particularly this artist was affected by it, but it just shows how it becomes a very different scenario when things go to auction rather than the gallery selling, and then what effect that has and how decisions have to be made as well. So, sold for 7.1 million. So not only was it way over the estimate there, it went like crazy. So that threw up all kinds. It's a great example because it's sort of, it's beyond any sort of normal situation that would happen, but it also throws up a lot of interesting issues for the galleries, for the artists, for the auction houses as well. So why did that happen? I can't say for sure, but here's some factors that a lot of the industry was saying why that sort of scenario happened. One is paintings generally it's a very popular medium. That's where record prices have been gone. This is a painting. Low supply. Adrian Geni produces very little. So he only produces like 10 and 15 works a year, and there's huge demand. From institutions, from museums. He's in a lot of institutions and museums, which already is a fantastic thing, so it makes their demand even higher. And there's a lot of speculation focus on artists like that. So the fact that there was very few works that come to market that you could get a hold of is the idea that there's this built-up demand creating this sort of tension. There's a low supply of masterpieces generally at auction. When something, if you call this a masterpiece, it's a young artist, but it's generally felt that he's incredibly talented. So when a great work by a talented artist does not come out that often to auction. That in itself creates an incredible energy as well. And also, particularly, I know it sounds not for all of us maybe a low price point, but if you compare it to a lot of other, huge artists like Basquiat in the hundreds of millions, something like 1.5 million estimate, for a work that has an incredible reputation, that's a very accessible level for a certain type of collector. lots of very wealthy Asian collectors in the market. And also at Venice Biennale in 2015, he had a solo show at the Romanian Pavilion, which was a huge validation, a huge honor, and that was a huge spotlight on him. So that timing was incredibly important as well. So for all those factors, that's, can explain why that happened, why that huge increase happened. Now, what happens then? So if you are the gallery and the artist, are you happy? Kind of. You're kind of happy. You're thinking, yeah, well, gosh, this made 7.1 million. It was selling at the gallery for 650,000. What does that throw up? What kind of dilemmas does that throw up for the artist and the gallery itself as well? From the artist's perspective, they're probably saying to the gallery, hey, gallery, my painting just went for 7.1 million. Why are you selling it for so cheap? Raise those prices, come on. Like, it's worth that now. And that's something that the gallery has to decide. Do they raise the price to 7.1 million now that it once made that level? Or what do they do? The artist probably wants more money. They seems like people will pay that money. So it might seem an obvious thing to do. But the problem is that the right level of what the artist really is at? Once again, an auction is one occurrence. Who knows why that night there happened to be so many people who happened to want that painting. The next night, if another painting came up, it might not actually make that much, or it might not even sell. So if they raised the prices, on the primary market to 7.1 million, and another piece came to auction the next week and only made 1 million, there would be real trouble, because you do not lower your artist prices. That is the worst. Sorry? Who got 7.1 million?
Private sellers. Who got money?
Who got the 7.1 million? Well, the person who sold it. We don't know who that person who sold it. We don't know who sold it. And that's the thing. The artist is presumably not the one who sold it, and they didn't get 7.1 million. But in their mind, they're thinking, well, all my paintings now are worth 7.1 million, maybe. But the danger of putting your prices then up to other customers at 7.9 billion is because maybe it was just a function of one night, one fantastic evening, that all the stars came together and it made that price. If the next time it happened it didn't, then you would have a serious problem. So what did Pace Gallery do? Something very sensible. They decided to keep their pricing for their new work at 650 level. A very sensible thing, because a gallerist is always thinking the long-term career of the artist. You don't want them to boom and then bust, because once you bust, you can never often recover. Once your prices go down, that's almost like sort of death as an artist in terms of your market. So what a gallery's role is to keep it steady and to keep it safe in some way. So what they did was decide to maintain the prices at 650 and also concentrate on museum efforts. So concentrate on getting the artist's work into museums and institutions, which will be the thing that will solidify their reputation and their career. Having an artist's work in a museum, a major museum, is an incredibly prestigious thing, and that's a thing that anchors a market as well, rather than just letting it fly and seeing what happens. That makes sense? So they were very sensible. I'm not sure how Adrian Genny felt about this, not getting 7 million for his paintings. But the idea is, in the long run, it's all going to sort of happen, and it's going to happen in a more controlled way. So this is just an example to show you what happens, that things happen at auction that are outside of the norm sometimes. And then the other parties have to really kind of come to terms with it and make decisions about it as well. Risks and strategies. So auction sales risks. So one thing we haven't talked about is, like, we all think, hey, it's going to make 6 times as much as we made at auction. Sometimes it doesn't sell. Who is that bad for when a thing doesn't sell? It's bad for the auction house. Even though the auction house, well, they're losing the sale of the commissions, but also for the reputation of the auction house. They don't want unsold lots. They want to be seen to be able to sell lots, right? So there's high and low issues in terms of the unsold lots. Strategies for minimizing market volatility, unregulated market issues, auction house dealer cooperation. Often, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, an auction house will instead of being an adversary to galleries and who are representing artists, we'll work together with the galleries. We'll say, look, we have one of your artist works coming up for sale. Can we work together to bring your collectors in and sort of get that moving? And in a way, work with them to protect the market for the particular artist as well. There are also the idea of there are stakeholders who are out there. So when a particular artist's work comes up for auction, there are a lot of people who have an interest in making sure that that work does well at auction. The artist, they don't want it to go unsold, but also the gallery doesn't want it to go unsold. Also, other collectors of that work don't want the price to go down or to go unsold. So often they will come in and sort of make sure that things go right in the auction. So there's a sort of camaraderie or sort of a cooperation that goes on to make sure that a market for an artist is protected as well. Just going back, I don't know how to go back now. So let's not go back anyway. Shifts in primary secondary market, private treaty sales. Interesting enough, as I said, the auction houses, as they operate in the secondary market, both auctions, but also private sales. And the sales the private sales that the auctions make are called private treaty sales, and that's an historic term. Don't ask me why, I'm not going to ask you why. That's just the way they've always been called, private treaty sales. That's the private sales. That's the sales that the auction houses make when they sell a work privately rather than at auction, when they're acting as dealers as well. Now, the major auction houses, their private sales are actually getting more and more plentiful in some way. It's becoming more a proportion of their work, of their sales, in relation to their auction sales as well. Now, I always think of, why would someone go to an auction house and say, can you sell my work privately? Find a buyer for my work, please, rather than, can you put this into auction? We know that one of the positive things about putting work into auction is it can actually achieve a lot greater price because there's competition, a lot of people interested. What are the reasons why they might say, can you actually sell it quietly, privately, rather than put it in an auction? Sort of giving it away in a bit. One is discretion. Sometimes people don't want people to know that they're selling work. A lot of people know what other people own in terms of artworks. If you put it into auction, people might be aware of who is selling it. You might not want to know that your business is failing, or you've had a very bad divorce, or you have money problems. So you'd want to have discretion in terms of that. So that's one reason why you might want to have the auction house sell it privately. Saying all this as well is, one, why would you go to an auction house with a private sale rather than a dealer? As I said, one of the big benefits is the breadth of the sort of collector relationships that an auction house has. If you're a small dealer in one city, you'll have much less ability to reach a huger audience and pinpoint it as well. So discretion is one reason. Risk. If you sell it privately, if you sell it at auction, there is a risk it won't sell. I always sort of say don't minimize that risk, because an artwork not selling at auction has a lot of very bad things attached to it. It's not just you don't make money, it's also it affects what you can and can't do with that piece of art. So if you put a piece of art into auction and it doesn't sell, it's what it's called burnt, which is not a very nice term to call it, but it means that somehow it affects your ability to transact that piece in the short term. So you can't put it right back into an auction the next year. The market will not look favorably on it. Or it might be devalued because it's been not sold. There's no real reason for it. It's not like it's a bad piece of art. It's just the fact of not selling has an effect, a psychological effect on that artwork. So by putting something to auction, you are risking that it might not sell. By doing it privately, no risk, because it's not an auction. It's not like if there's no one interested, there's just no one interested. It doesn't sort of affect the work, and it's not a public thing. If you put your work into auction, your piece of work, and it doesn't sell, it's a very public thing. Everyone knows the auction record. You look at ArtNet, look at the databases, it'll say unsold. So that will be attached to that piece of work in whatever way you can. Privately, you don't run that risk. It's all under the radar. So that's another reason why you might want to sell it privately. Flexible sales timing. If you need the money like tomorrow, if you need the money the next day after tomorrow, an auction is not the best scenario for you. You might have to wait 6 months till the next relevant auction comes up. That might not be an option for you. Doing it privately, you can dictate, you can somehow control when and how quickly you might want to sell a piece of work. So there's that flexibility as well. I'm selling the private treaties now for you. That's okay, there you go. The cost as well. I mean, I don't know. There's the premiums. When you're buying and selling at auction, can be high. You also were going to have to, pay a commission somewhere, but it probably is not going to be as high as at auction. That's maybe another factor. So let's look at the auction houses now and how they operate and what they're doing. There's something called, and comes from one of the auction house. The major auction houses who call this thing called a virtuous cycle. And what that means is, the auction houses, in order to sell work, have to get people to bring their work to them. That's kind of obvious. They can't be in business if they don't have things to sell. And they don't actually produce the work, so they're dependent on people bringing the work to them, to consign to them, to sell it. So a lot of the efforts have to go into getting people to bring the work to them. And there's a lot of things that you need to do to enable that and to promote that as well. Now, what sometimes happens is if a particular auction house is seen to be making record prices or doing very, very well with a particular artist market or with a particular sector, the consignors will tend to go to that auction house because, where should I go? I have a Basquiat to sell. Well, this auction house did very well. It had a record price with the Basquiat last time. I'll probably go to them because they seem to be able to sell that well. So if you own something, you want to go to the place where you're going to get the best price for. So what happens is that creates a sort of virtuous cycle where people sort of will tend to keep going to the place that's doing well with a particular market or artist. And that's very difficult to break. But it can be broken, and there's actually sort of strategies that are happening. And I say the competition for consignments, why? One reason, obviously, is you want people to bring work to you so you can sell it, because you make commission, that's your business. But also you want consignments because the results of the consignments will reflect your success levels in order to bring other works as well. So you want the works to come to you so that you can get a good price for them so that other people will bring similar work to you. Does that make sense? It's a cyclical thing that goes on. So the question is, what are the auction houses' toolkit? And this is across the board. It's not one particular or any particular auction houses. What can auction houses do to promote people bringing their work to that particular auction house? Sellers and buyers premium. I'm not going to give away too many sort of secrets, but that's something they can entice people to bring. As I said, the seller's premium, so if, what they do is they do charge a commission to the seller for selling their work, but that's negotiable. If an auction house really wants a particular work, they would be able to maybe negotiate that downward. So they'll say, look, I really want that work. We'll give you a discount on the seller's premium, but maybe even eliminate it. But don't ask too much for that. It's got to be pretty good for that. Buyer's premium, as I said, you cannot contract out of. You must charge the buyer's premium. But sometimes you can use that as an enticement to someone who has work to maybe share that buyer's premium with them. Don't ask the auction house for that, though, unless you're in a very, very strong position. Financing is another thing they can do. They can actually maybe, they have very strong financing arms for the major auction houses. They can help you. If you're saying, I'd like to bid on that, but I'm not sure I can afford it, we can help you. We can help finance that, or they can leverage with your existing collection. There's ways of them to work with you in terms of enabling you to do things. Catalog coverage, you can actually say, I want my work to be on the cover of that catalog. A lot of these things are ego-driven, but it's a lot of times it's something that people want. Auction house placement, you could say, I want my work to be #1 on the auction house in a catalog. Travels. An auction house will often agree or offer to take the work that you're trying to sell and travel it. So the idea of that is to show it to as many potential buyers as possible. So bring it to Hong Kong, bring it to New York, bring it to Dubai. So when you do that, people go see it and they go, oh, that's really nice. When you see a work, when you travel it, you're more likely to attract people rather than sending a picture around by email. So it's an event. And it's also showing the importance of it. So that's something that the auction houses might do. If they're really interested, they will offer to take your work and actually travel it. It's not cheap for the auction houses, but often it's in a great interest to do. They can also decide where they want to sell the work, where the best place for that work is. Where is the best place to be selling a Basquiat now? Is it New York? Is it Hong Kong? Is it Dubai? So they can actually, because they have the ability in a global way to do that as well. Marketing, very big marketing machines. They can produce videos about your work. They can, do lots of press, get, publish books. There's a lot of way of marketing your work and pushing that thing. So when an auction house is trying to obtain a work, these are all the things that will kick in terms of what they're able to provide and what they can offer, if it's in a competitive sort of environment. And lastly, and this is a really fun one, is guarantees. And we'll talk a bit further into. This is another way that the auction house can ensure that they're going to get someone to give them the work. Anyone heard of guarantees? Yes, some of you? It's a wonderful thing. Guarantees, basically, the auction house, the ultimate gift they can give you is they say, like, I really want your Basquiat. No matter what happens at auction, I will give you $100 million. Give it to us. And a collector goes like, okay, so I have no risk. I will get 100 million whether it sells or doesn't sell. You kind of think, why would I not do that? So that's a great incentive for the auction house to offer to a collector. And that's been growing and growing as well. I'll talk about it in a little bit, but that's just, there's different types of guarantees that are being offered now. So it's a way of spreading the risk of things not selling to ensure you get that sort of thing going on. Some innovative strategies, I think, that are in terms of broadening the market as well, that the auction houses are doing, of sort of moving away from just your standard collector base, from engaging new people who haven't been involved in the art market. One is sort of curated sales and merged categories. Cross-collecting, I think this idea, and this is happening more and more, it's sort of engaging with the luxury goods businesses and industries, and engaging those people into the art world, into the art market as well. And guarantees, but that's not so innovative, but we'll talk about it. This is a video that's from Sotheby's. I'll have a look at it as well.
Art inspires me in so many ways. I could literally lose my heart to art. It's very dangerous. I think if I'm not careful, I'd sort of sell my children for a painting.
This is Anya Heinmarsh, who's an accessories handbag designer.
Really feed your brain. We work with artists, we work with graphic designers, we work with amazing brands. It's both sort of subconscious and quite a conscious collaboration. It's one of the real joys of what I do. I think what really drives a great art collector is passion. You've got to love it. I like art that makes you look again. I tend to be drawn to things that are quite different in the way that they're practically made. The pieces that make me smile, they're quite statementy. You might have lots in a room, but they give me real pleasure. There are parallels between an accessories and a luxury goods brand such as mine and Sotheby's. It's about quality. Both brands care about what they do. They really genuinely care about what they touch and what they sell. What attracted me mostly to contemporary curated was the fact that you get to work so closely with the actual art, and that's a pretty big honour, frankly. For example, the Keith Haring, which is just so exciting, such a beautiful piece to really spend time looking at and sort of seeing all the energy and the joy of that picture. It's very sort of unapologetic. I love the way that contemporary brings perhaps a new audience, but also it just makes people look at a very personal edit. It's someone's view, and sometimes it just makes you look at things afresh. I think that there is a sort of a thread throughout the collection of pieces, a bit like a good accessory. They're things you notice, and they're quite mood-altering. Art has always been a part of my life. It was always something I was very engaged with and something I loved, and it was very much my thing. I learned it for myself. Art is a way of showing your personality, showing what you care about. It's something that people respond to. It's not a luxury, I don't think. I think it's slightly a necessity, actually.
Okay, I think we've had enough of that. I think the gist of it is very interesting because there's a lot of, Anya Heinmarsh is accessories sort of in the fashion world, but there's links between sort of fashion, fashion and art, and also sort of between the people who are engaged in fashion and the art world as well. So they engage, both auction houses engage sort of other people who are involved in luxury goods or in fashion to sort of what she was doing is curating a sale, so she was choosing art that was going to sell. But it sends a message basically that the similarity between the luxury goods business and the art world, and trying to bring those people on board into the same sort of ecosystem. Other things that are great things are single owner celebrity sales. We had the estate of David Bowie. 350 works. It was a white glove sale, which means everything was sold. Well done. So every single lot that was there was sold. We made 33 million. Boosts the British market. But these are the very interesting things, and this is about engaging new markets, because 55.8 thousand visitors to the global. They traveled this exhibition as well. 55.8 thousand visitors to things. I presume most of these people were not ethnic art lovers or art collectors. So this is sort of bringing those people in different ways. 26.5 thousand online sales audience. 1750 attended the sale room in London, bringing these people in who probably never been into the auction house sale room as well. So these are a way of new client focus in terms of the bringing celebrity stuff as well. Back to the guarantees, and we're not going to spend too much time, but we talked about the guarantees, the idea that what it basically does is it takes the risk of the auction house, of the article not selling, and plays it onto the auction house. So basically the auction house saying, we're going to give you this money whether it sells or not. If it doesn't sell, it's not great for the auction house, because they then have to put out that money, even though it didn't sell, and then they own the artwork. So it's not something that's great. There's a lot of risk attached to it as well. So the idea is, and which has happened more and more, is then putting the risk onto somebody else. So the auction house will have third-party guarantees. So what they will do is say, we want your painting collector person, and we will make sure that we pay you a certain amount, whether it sells or not, but we're not going to actually sell it. We're going to get someone else to come and give the money for that guarantee. Sounds like an odd thing. So once again, it's patching the risk again. So the risk was originally with the collector who's going to sell it, then it moves to the auction house, and now it moves to a third party. Does that make sense? It's difficult. The key is, why would a third party do that? You think, why would someone else come in and guarantee a lot at an auction for an auction house? I think the key is, if you look at something like, because what often happens with a third-party guarantor is, yes, they're putting the money in, but part of the deal, and it's negotiable, is they might get a percentage of the amount that the price, if it goes over the price that they're guaranteeing, they will get a portion of that overage. So if you look at the Da Vinci example, which is a very prime, wonderful example, there was a guarantee, a third-party guarantee on the Da Vinci for about $100 million, apparently. Right? It sold for $400 million. So the overage over the guarantee and that price was $300 million. Whoever third-party, if anyone here did it, you're very lucky. Whoever did that third-party guarantee, whatever percentage, whether it was 10% or 50%, made tens or hundreds of millions for just making that guarantee. So it's a kind of a business proposition. It's risky as well, but if you're sure of it and you might actually want that piece, so you're not bothered if you get it, people are making the money and it's becoming a business, sort of third-party guarantors as well. All gets very complicated. You thought that auctions were easy? It's not. Right, very quickly, I want to go through an actual auction catalog, and just to show you what these things mean. So here you have these little symbols. Just keep an eye on that. They're really tiny, but they're very important. So they mean something. And I want to go through each of the headings. This is an actual catalog copy. This is a Peter Doig piece. So you'll see a heading called Provenance, Exhibited, Literature, Catalog Note. Every artwork has that in the catalog. So, and basically what this is trying to sort of demonstrate the value. You're in each of these categories, you're trying to sort of justify why this thing is worth what we're trying to sell it for, showing you, the value, the overall value based on these subsections. So one, it says a lot of detail, catalog symbols, authenticity. Is it a genuine article? There are ways to find that out. It could be guaranteed by the artists themselves or the artist's estate. There's also something called the catalog raisonné, which top artists have. Basically, it's a catalog of every single work that artist has produced, and it's like a Bible for that artist's market. If this work is in that catalog raisonné, then you're very sure that it's authentic. So that's a very important thing. Provenance. So provenance is who owned this before. An auction house has to list all the previous owners of that particular work. And that proves a number of things. A, the importance. It could be some very important or very prestigious people who've owned it, maybe royalty or maybe a museum, which increases the validation value of it. But you want to know as well where it's been. You know, it sort of gives you a sense of, was it sold at auction before? When was it sold? It doesn't say the prices or anything. It just says where, who the sellers were, what galleries sold, and when. Exhibition history, it shows when that particular work, where that particular work was exhibited, what museums and institutions, which also gives a lot of weight to, if it's just shown at the Museum of Modern Art in New York or the Tate, that gives a lot of extra value to that work as well. Literature, when this work was actually included in any books, which also gives some weight to it. And there's a very large catalogue note, which is descriptive of the actual work. And it's showing the importance of it, why this work was particularly important in their career. It's just sort of demonstrating why this work is being sold and what the importance of it as well. And as well, a condition report is accepted. So catalogue notes, so, you know, those little sort of symbols I showed you, keep an eye on those because they are important. They tell you a lot of what's going on. One, if you see a little square like that, be very happy because it means there's no reserve. Then what a reserve, I'll just go quickly, is basically a reserve. When you see an estimate of a piece of work, let's say 1 million to 2 million is the estimate. You don't necessarily have to bid up to 1 million to get it. There is a secret number that the owner will negotiate or decide with the auction house and what the level at which they will be able to sell it. So they say that even if we don't get up to the low estimate, what number will we accept that will say we can sell it? Often it's, say, 10% below the low estimate, something like that. But it's secret, so only the person who's selling it knows. That makes sense? So it's basically a way of making sure it doesn't, you know, it can still sell if it doesn't make that estimate number, but you get a certain basic amount that you really want from it. But it's something that's not disclosed during the auction. Sometimes there's no reserve. Not often, but when there is, that means that if you bid $1 and no one else is in the room, it's yours, even if the estimate was 1 million to 2 million. So that brings a lot of people into the auction because they think you can get a bargain. You know, who knows? There might not be anyone in the room. Guaranteed properly, the auction house have to tell you and indicate when a particular artwork has been guaranteed. So you'll see that symbol. That's a third-party guarantee. It's called an irrevocable bid. Property with some of those things. I'm going to fast forward quickly because there's a lot of things that I want to get through quickly. Logistics-wise, there's a choice of venue. Just logistics, there's some big headings here. A, the auction house has to decide where in their sort of global network they want to sell that work. And that's based on a lot of things. That could be based on tax issues for the collector, but also where the market for that particular work is best. So they could say, we should have it in our Hong Kong sale. We should have it in our London sale. So that's a thing. Reserves, we talked about. Setting estimates, do you do it really high or do you really low? Who wants really high estimates? The seller. They want to get as much money as possible. Do the auction house always want really high estimates? Not always, because they want to make sure that it sells. So sometimes there's a negotiation that has to go on, whether it's about the estimates. And there's, as you know, there's consequences for it not selling. So it's a delicate balance of making sure that that's working. When you're in auction bidding, there's all kinds of ways that bidding comes in. In person, people putting up a paddle, telephone bids, lots and lots of people on the telephone. Online, that's becoming a very big thing. Online bids, because there are online auctions as well. And you can also actually put an absentee bid, like a sort of sealed bid saying, the maximum I want to pay for this amount, here's the envelope, I'm going on holiday. So you're not actually involved in the auction, but you placed a bid in the auction as well. These are things that at the auction, you've got to really keep your eye on. It's a lot of things to sort of juggle. Expansions, globalization, China, and I think all the auction houses are actually, putting on a lot of really interesting ways are expanding their services to their collectors in a way of actually becoming the kind of one-stop shop for their collectors, servicing all the collectors need, with the privacy, art advisories, very interesting acquisitions that have been made that are things that are going to assist the collectors as well. And this is where it starts getting interesting. This blurring of the boundaries of the auction sectors, expanding the offer, and actually placing work not necessarily where it belongs, but where there's more collector and more money that's to be made. So, for instance, Sotheby's, in their contemporary sale in New York, were selling Michael Schumacher's Ferrari. And actually, is this a contemporary piece of artwork? I don't know. But it was in the sale, and it did really well. So the idea was, high estimate of 5.5 million, and sold for 7.5 million. So great. Similarly, Christie's, and this is we'll get back to the Leonardo as well, sold this piece of work in a contemporary art sale. This is a 500-year-old painting, was being sold in Christie's contemporary art sale. Why? What is that about? It's about basically placing, and people say if they put it in an old master sale, it probably very unlikely it would have made 450 million dollars, which it was made, because the money is in the contemporary market. So bring the artwork to the money. It's that sort of thing. So the blurring of those boundaries as well. Anyone seen this historic point where?
The masterpiece by Leonardo Christ the Savior.
You can get all excited and pretend you're at the auction now. You can bid as well if you have $400 million as
For
well.
those of you following online, you may not have heard it. The bid was 350, was called on the telephone at 350 million for Leonardo Salvador Mundi. 400 million.
Sorry.
Thank you all for your bidding here and on the telephone to my left. And of course here, Loic and Francois, Leonardo Salvador Mundi, selling here at Christie's. $400 million is the bid, and the piece is sold.
It's an orgy of applause and things. And the favorite bit is coming up. There, kiss on the head. There we go. That's what you get for 400 million, is a kiss on the head. How did they do it? That's the interesting thing. How did that happen? They marketed like crazy, and they did very innovative things. You guys probably would agree. They traveled to London, to Hong Kong, to San Francisco, to New York. They had 27,000 visitors to the gallery. I stood in line for an hour and a half. I mean, that wasn't fun. Highest number of viewers for any individual work of art. They really sort of pulled all stops out as well. Interesting, I'll just do a very little bit of this video. They got a sort of very big Nadav Kandar, who's a very established photographer and video artist, to do this video. Yeah, we'll just do a little bit. Go up to about 2.5 minutes. 2.5. Yeah. Yeah. Speed it up a bit. It's a religious experience seeing this movie. Keep your eyes peeled. It's praying to the Da Vinci as well. Leonardo DiCaprio, that's enough, all you need to know. That was the key. So 450 million, that's all it takes. Leonardo DiCaprio looking up at it, that's great. So, I mean, that was part of the marketing, and it was really fantastic. Yeah, I'm just going to finish off now. We'll have a couple of questions. Online, the auction house is doing very well online as well. And bringing new audiences, that's the key. And they're doing online-only auctions. Not only online bidding, but online-only auctions where they're getting a lot of new customers as well. And let's go quickly through. High net worth individuals, this is one of them. This is an example of, if you want publicity, this man paid $110 million for this Basquiat, and it was on every paper in every world city. So interesting. And wealth is gaining, the idea, the fact that the high net worth individual and the wealth is growing and not diminishing, and this has seemed to be appealing. And the great news, last slide, auction sales have gone up 25%. It was the results just happened last week. They're coming out, and it's good news. So yay auctions, and everyone go to auctions. And thank you very much for your time and attention. We have a few minutes for questions. Anyone have any questions? Or
I'm going to bring artists into the equation. Because you mentioned Adrian Jenny as one example, and I do know him, and I can tell you what he thinks. But I want you to go a bit further into, there's been a movement for a number of years where artists have been trying to get something called, it's like a percent for art. Because artists basically receive very little, and there are many, many examples of artists who have sold their work at a very low price, and then the auction houses make a fortune out of it, and the seller makes a fortune out of it, and the artist sees nothing. And there's been an attempt to try and make sure that there's a percentage of the sale that goes back to the artist, because after all, they are the person who began this whole thing. There's very little talk about artists in relation to auctions. So can you say why, and why they're being cut out all the time?
Okay. Well, very good point. And I actually had that in one of the slides, but I ran out of time, so I didn't put it in. There is something called artist resale rights, and what to suite, which is, and so it's long been this issue of the fact that if Basquiat were live and one of his paintings sold for 100 million, he does get nothing from it. So, maybe he sold that work for $10 when he was a young man. And there's a sense of unfairness and the sense of those prices that have been cut out of that transaction. So there was this drive on behalf of artists to have them included, to get some share of those sales, both on the dealer side as well as the auction side. So there is in a European directive that they have to, that both auction houses and dealers have to pay a portion of the proceeds of the sale to the artist or the artist's estate after 70 years after the death of the artist, if they're European, right? So that's the story. But it's also capped at 12,500 euros. So we're not talking a lot of money that they're going to get, but it's the idea is at least it's something. It's a recognition that the artist should be participating in it. Now, in the US, they've been talking about this for a while, but it has not stuck, as I believe. They're still trying to sort of fight for this. But it's a sort of sliding scale calculation that they do get part of it, but there is an issue, in fact. And what did Adrian Genny think of this 7.2 million? Sorry to ask you a question back, Kate.
I mean, he's been mortified for years at both the perception of what kind of artist he is, because of course, if he's an auction artist, then he only sells to the billionaires, and it means that he's not taken seriously as an artist by museums or by other artists. He's a fake, and it's something he takes his practice very, very seriously, and so he hasn't found it helpful at all. That the carelessness of how people would buy a work and then put it into auction, works basically. And
that's very telling in the sense, which is right, which is why a gallery tries to control who buys it. They don't want people to buy it who are going to put it into an auction, and then deal with this very difficult situation when things are out of control in an auction situation, and the artists aren't that comfortable with it as well. Anyone? Any questions? It's all so clear.
Hello?
Are you all? Sorry.
It's Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Can you remember some most longest and steadiest career of prices for the artist? Was there somebody who started from $100 and was increasing the price, living long and happy?
Right. Without jumping up and going crazy, do you mean? Or I think that's a good question. I mean, it has more historically been, it's always been like that, up until the last 10, 20 years where it's all, things have gone a bit crazy. And that's because the market's gotten bigger, and it's why people are competing for things more. I think in a way, the auction market, unfortunately, have been seen as sort of something that's going to go crazy, that we're waiting for the drama to happen, where historically it's always been, and it is much healthier for things to move like that. And everyone's trying to make things move like that. But the thing is, when things go to auction, no one has control. And that's the issue. And then things happen that make it very kind of awkward for artists, awkward for, I think a lot of artists, sort of Peter Doig as well, who's same level, is a bit embarrassed. He doesn't want things, he doesn't think his work should be sold for $50 million or something, but he's got no control of it. It's the market sort of takes over, and that's just the way it is. There are ways to tame that. I mean, there are ways of the gallery system kicking in and being more sure about who they're selling to as well, but also, there are ways of ensuring that might not happen. The stakeholders, other collectors, the gallerists, do sort of pitch in, and the auction houses are working with the galleries oftentimes to make sure that things don't go crazy, and because there's no one's interest for things to go crazy, I think, at the end of the day, except for one seller here and there of the Da Vinci. Any other questions? Yep. Someone have a...
Hello, thank you for your lecture. So I have more like a professional question. So what does it take today to get in this industry, like to work in these auction houses? What kind of like career path in this industry, if you can tell? Thank you.
Gosh, these are hard questions. I'm not the best person because I don't work in the auction house, but I can tell from my students, sort of what's happening. I think that there used to be a sort of more classic sort of route, art history, people moving in, big specialist departments. But more and more, the auction house is it's very keen to bring sort of business-minded people in, to bring people who have a sort of commercial and languages as well, exactly, and the ability to sort of interact and relate in a global way. No. Sorry, we're going to have a. Do you want to say the word?
I think passion for the subject.
Do you want to say a few words on that?
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to take over. But I can give you a job. No, not quite, but you need a very good visa. Remember, a visa would help. But I think when I interview young people, for me the most important thing is the passion. I remember a young man came to me who liked English watercolors, and the English watercolor market is dead. No one likes English water, except for this man. So I so liked his passion. I said, please come and work in English watercolors. I think you're mad, but do it. And he's revitalized the market. and suddenly he's made English watercolors relatively sexy. But so passion to me is the important thing. And languages are very helpful, except in English watercolors, because only mad English people buy them. Sorry.
And a yellow scarf, so you're in. You got one. No. A question here?
Thank you. And do you think that the art market needs more legal regulation? Or it's fine like this?
That's a great question. You have no idea how often that's been discussed. It's always discussed. It's an unregulated market. It's going to be a very big market. It's an issue. It's like it's sort of the Wild West. It really is. And not many markets that size are not regulated. Imagine, to buy and sell art, if you were buying and sell houses at a certain level, you need a real estate license. There's set contracts. There's regulatory aspects. The art world, you're all art advisors. You all can do it. Anyone can do anything they want, which is very attractive in a way, and it's very attractive, sort of for doing business often. But it causes a lot of problems. The issue is how do you regulate it, and that's something that's always talked about. Who regulates it? It's got to be someone who understands the industry, which is not the most simple industry. You wouldn't want some government bureaucrat to be regulating because it wouldn't work. And also, I think, and this is something I always answer to that, it's not regulated. You still are, you can't commit fraud, you can't commit a crime, you can't that, but it's also self-regulated to a great degree. The market kind of evens itself out. If you do something that's sort of nasty or not moralistically great, the market will come back at you and punish you. There are consequences. So it kind of does, it works in a ways that self-regulates itself as well. But this is something that's been talked about a lot, so it's a good question.
Thank you.
Hello, Jeffrey. Thank you for your lecture. Actually, I'm interested. What do you think about Russian auctions? If they have some kind of a successful future, Because,
oh gosh,
you know,
who planted these questions? That's okay. That's a very good question. I'm not the expert on that in terms of that. I think what's happened. Russian auctions in Russia or Russian auctions in general?
I mean, like even Sotheby's, if they probably planning some auctions here, because they are.
Would you like to answer that question?
Actually, I'm really interested in that.
Sorry, you're better than I am.
Добрый вечер, спасибо за вопросы.
Good evening and thank you for your question. Thank you, Jeffrey, for your lecture.
It's our old dream to conduct auctions in Russia, and we did it 30 years ago in 1988.
Yeah, I know.
And would like to repeat it, of course, but it takes a lot of energy, a lot of money, and it should be right time, right place. It's always business decision, and in Russian market should be really international. I mean, it should be really international demand for the Russian art. So we hope this time comes and we come back with an auction. But again, it's a long dream. Okay. But it was a trophy, an experiment 30 years ago. Now we should be very pragmatic and realistic. Thank you for your question.
Thank you.
But I think. Oh wait.
Before you sit down, can I ask you one question?
Yes.
To add to that, because if it's about Russian artists needing to be strong in the international market, how can Sotheby's help that so that you can then make the auction?
Yes, actually, we support Russian market we do it on a regular basis. So for the 30 years from the first auction, we include Russian contemporary art in our sales, and you know we have this section. So we do this through curated. Dedicated auction, just like contemporary curated crossroads, and we also do just silent exhibitions. We invite young artists, and our curators or invited curator do silent exhibition that is also very successful. But everything happens in London or New York, not in Russia. In Russia, we bring exhibitions like traveling exhibitions that are very expensive to travel, and we do that all the time. So we try to help and we try to promote Russian contemporary art and open it to the rest of the world, because we think it's a great art. Thank you.
There you go. Yeah, but that's a very interesting good thing, which I didn't mention as well. The auction houses, yes, they conduct auction only in a certain limited number of jurisdictions, but have offices in many, many more than that. And that's about engaging with the local collecting community, with the artistic community. So the breadth of the auction houses are, I'm not trying to sell the auction houses, but I mean, in terms of their engagement in a global way, it's not just about the auctions that are put on. It's very much about, having sort of fingers in all jurisdictions as well. That's my last selling job for the auction house. Any further questions? Yeah, one last.
Thank you very much for your lecture. Excuse me for asking in Russian. We also have our own auctions that are rather young, for young artists. And our goal is to attract as many viewers as possible to Russian artists. My question is the following. Does it make any sense? Is there any sense in such smaller events happening, in them surviving? Are they practically possible?
Very good question. And I mean, that's something I'd sort of premise, and I know this made it sound like there's only 2 auction houses and they're the ones who do all the work. There are many more auction houses, and they probably do much more important work than I saw the Reason Christie's, but they, what you see, and once again, it's sort of a bit distortion. What you see and what we focus on are the major auction houses, and there's a lot more auction house activity that goes on, way more. Every region, all through Europe, everywhere you go, smaller auction houses, and they're doing the really, the work of sort of building up for grassroots and not, and more and more the major auction houses are raising the level at which they're operating in terms of their price ranges. So they're sort of, not so much engaged in the lower markets anymore. But I think that throws up huge opportunities for smaller auction houses to actually take up that mantle, because there's a lot of demand, there's a lot of work to be done, and those things, that level shouldn't be forgotten. But I think that in a way for smaller auction houses, I think it's a really positive thing that you're now able to step into that sort of place that the other auction houses, for whatever reasons, aren't able to operate anymore. So go for it. Right. No more questions. Thank you very much, guys. Very good questions, and I appreciate it.